The frequency. Why 2% of humans hear a sound that shouldn't exist. 2% of people hear a low rumble they can't escape. It starts at night. She's in the kitchen, every plug pulled, the fridge unplugged, the breaker off. The house goes quiet. The sound stays, a distant diesel idling inside her chest. Sleep collapses. Arguments start. Work slips. A doctor says her hearing is normal. A sound meter shows nothing. But at 17 to 19 hertz, her heart rate jumps. Palms sweat. Something's happening below hearing, like a radio she didn't mean to tune. We'll follow the cases, the science of infrasound, why just some hear it, where it comes from, and what helps. Rewind. The night the noise began. They describe it the same way on different continents. A truck idling somewhere you can't find. In Taos, New Mexico, it began for Michael after midnight. He stepped out onto the porch. Crickets, distant highway, a sky so quiet you could hear your own breath. No hum. Back inside, the low engine returned, thick and steady, as if it lived in the walls. He turned off the furnace, then the water heater. He shut the main breaker. The refrigerator sighed and died. The sound didn't. 3 weeks later in Bristol, Denise pressed her ear to the carpet at 2 a.m, certain a neighbor had installed some new machine. She walked the block in her robe, nothing on the street. Back in the flat, the rumble grew heavier near the bedroom corner. She moved the bed away from the wall and slept for an hour, then woke at 3:07 a.m. The silence had snapped and reset like a switch. On the other side of the world in Auckland, Sam wrote a note on a calendar. Hum starts 1:42 a.m. Over the next month, the same note appeared on Tuesdays and Thursdays, then Saturdays. The pattern made him feel less alone and more trapped. When he put on foam earplugs, the noise pressed through his chest instead, like a hand. Patterns emerged in their diaries. Late night onset, stronger indoors than outdoors, worst in the stillest hours when the city's usual mask of noise thinned. Along with the sound came symptoms that didn't fit a normal nuisance. Pressure behind the eyes, a band around the head, sudden nausea that faded when they stepped into the yard. They'd lie awake waiting for it, and when it came, their bodies braced before their ears confirmed it. "I thought I was going crazy," Denise told her sister. She wasn't the first to say it. Action followed desperation. Michael drove the back roads at night, windows cracked, trying to chase a phantom engine. He parked under high-voltage lines, then miles from them. The hum was the same. Denise knocked on the landlord's door, then the factory managers, then city offices. Inspectors visited with sound meters, read and A-weighting, and shrugged. Within limits. Sam bought a stethoscope and pressed it to walls and pipes, convinced the house itself was singing. Earplugs, white noise machines, noise-canceling headphones. They blurred the edges but didn't touch the core. This bled into daily life. Michael started missing mornings. He'd stare at spreadsheets and see only the gaps where sleep should have been. His partner stopped believing him, then started sleeping at her mother's. Denise began counting seconds between pulses she couldn't prove. She fought with her boyfriend about moving. He said there was nothing to move away from. In small corners of the internet, they found each other. Threads titled, "Does anyone else hear this?" That turned into late-night lifelines. The same phrases kept showing up. Diesel, idling, worse inside, 3 a.m. Then a test tone changed the mood from spooky to clinical. On a forum, someone posted a link to a sweep that dipped below hearing. Sam tried it at barely audible levels. As the slider hovered around 17 to 19 hertz, his stomach turned and his palms went cold. He didn't hear much, but something in him reacted. Michael felt a flutter, a faint pressure behind his eyes. Denise paused the clip and sat very still, feeling the room breathe back at her. It wasn't proof in a legal sense, but it was the first shared experiment that behaved like the nights did, creating a curiosity gap they could test again, instead of a mystery they could only fear. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the margins. A handful of listeners noticed the hum seemed to vanish the moment they stepped into hallways or out onto lawns, then return when they crossed a particular spot in the room. Sam moved his bed a meter and slept better for 2 nights. Michael stacked books under the bed frame and felt the pressure lift 1 notch. These were small, fragile wins, the kind that make you test superstition before science. What nobody knew at the time was that this wasn't just about ears. Their bodies were picking up a low-frequency signal that conventional meters didn't bother to see. The sound could be weak in air and strong in structures, and their physiology didn't care which path it took. The paradox, sound without sound, would make sense later. For now, the story was still a hunt. Where do you start when the noise lives in your chest and only wakes when the city sleeps? To understand why their hearts raced at a frequency they couldn't hear, we need to go below hearing itself. What infrasound does to a body. To understand the feeling of a truck idling inside your chest, start with a definition that doesn't comfort anyone. Infrasound is sound below 20 hertz. You don't so much hear it as feel it. Its wavelengths are long, meters long, so it wraps around you, slips through walls, and couples into the things you live in. The ear isn't the only sensor. Your whole body is. Here's what that means in human terms. At very low frequencies, the chest wall and abdominal cavity can resonate a little, like a slow pump handle. You feel a pressure that doesn't match what your ears report. The vestibular system, the balance organs in your inner ear, also respond to low-frequency motion and pressure shifts. When they're nudged without a matching visual cue, the brain reads conflict, nausea, dizziness, a vague sense that the room is wrong. Meanwhile, your autonomic nervous system, the part that handles heart rate and sweat, watches for patterns tied to threat. It doesn't ask whether a tone is audible. It asks whether the pattern looks like turbulence, thunder, or a big body moving nearby. In lab exposures, researchers have seen small but clear physiological nudges at low levels in some people. Heart rate variability shifts, tiny rises in skin conductance, a bump in anxiety scores. We're not talking concert bass that rattles pictures. We're talking a whisper of pressure near the edge of hearing, or just below it, especially around a band that keeps showing up in human stories, 17 to 19 hertz. That aligns with controlled infrasound studies where hidden low components increase reported tension in a subset of participants, while objective markers nudged in the same direction. That band has a specific anchor. Measurements place the ocular or eyeball resonance near 18.98 hertz. Your eyes are fluid-filled spheres with elastic walls. At that frequency, they can micro-oscillate. So slightly you don't notice the movement, but enough to tickle the retina mechanically. People describe faint gray shadows or a sense of motion at the edge of vision. Pair that with a low, steady vibration you barely register, and your threat circuits start paying attention. You don't need ghosts when your hardware is producing its own shadows. This is a clean research bridge that turns haunted rooms into testable biology. Now take that back to the kitchen at 2 a.m. The house air is still outside noise that usually masks low frequencies has dropped. If there's a faint tone in the room, generated far away and amplified by the geometry of the space, you might not hear it as a note, but your chest feels a band of pressure. Your vestibular system sees a slow sway with no visual partner. Your eyes might jitter at their resonant rate. The autonomic system, trained by a lifetime of patterns, lifts heart rate and slicks your palms. This is how a sound meter can say, "nothing unusual," while your body insists something's wrong. It matters that standard sound meters often ignore this band. Many measurements use A-weighting, which mimics the ear sensitivity and rolls off the low end. Infrasound needs Z-weighting or dedicated microbarometers to show up. And even then, the culprit might not be a pure air pressure wave at your ear. Low-frequency energy couples into structures, floors, walls, ductwork. Your bed frame can become part of the instrument. Put your head on that instrument and you've made a sensor with your skull. Not everyone reacts the same way. In the groups who do, there's a familiar profile. People with motion sickness, vestibular migraine, or disorders, where the balance system argues with the eyes and ears. Their threshold for noticing low-frequency conflict is lower. Think of them as better detectors with a nervous system tuned for safety. That's not a flaw, it's a sensitivity. A small study here, a field test there, expose volunteers to barely audible tones just under 20 hertz and ask them how they feel. Some shrug. A fraction report unease, a weight on the chest, a need to step away. In that slice, even when loudness ratings hover near zero, the body reacts. Around 17 to 19 hertz, those reactions nudge higher for some. It lines up with what Michael, Denise, and Sam found in their makeshift tests at home. There's also a timing piece. Low-frequency sources in nature, storms, distant surf, wax and wane with weather and season. Industrial sources shift with load and night cycles. In the quiet hours, when masking noise fades, slow tones stand naked. That's when room physics steps in. Long wavelengths set up standing waves between parallel walls. Corners become pressure traps. Add a small opening to a large volume, a vent, a chimney, and you've built a Helmholtz resonator, a giant bottle that prefers one low note. If the preferred note sits near that haunted band, you've created a personal chapel for the body to pray to a frequency it can't hear. If you're looking for a single villain, this is frustrating. The reality is layered. A small external signal, a room that magnifies it in certain spots, a body whose sensors are designed to notice motion and pressure changes even when ears do not. Add a brain that's always predicting what should happen next, and you have a recipe for salience. The perception feels inescapable because the detectors aren't just ears, they're everywhere. So when the doctor says hearing is normal and the meter says nothing's wrong, both can be technically true. It's the wrong test for the right complaint. The better frame is this. Some bodies pick up low-frequency cues and translate them into stress. The sound is weak, the response is strong, and for about 2% of people, that translation is loud enough to rewrite a life. If that's the hardware, the next question is the firmware. Why do some brains turn a faint vibration into a signal that won't let go? The 2%. Biological hardware conflict. Here's the pivot. If the body is the sensor, why do only some bodies light up? Start with the mechanics. Ears aren't identical parts off a line. Small differences, ear canal length, the stiffness of the eardrum and middle ear bones, the way sinuses and nasopharynx connect, change how low frequencies pass through or get reflected. A slightly longer canal shifts resonances. A more compliant middle ear moves a little more at the bottom end. None of this makes a person better or worse at hearing. It just tunes the whole head like a slightly different instrument. Then there's the balance system. People who get car sick on winding roads, who feel wrung out after a day under fluorescent lights, who've been told they have vestibular migraine or PPPD, persistent postural perceptual dizziness, show up in hum forums a lot. Their vestibular system is hyper-attentive. Give that system a slow sway without a matching visual cue, and it flags it faster. That's useful in a storm at sea. At 2 a.m., in a quiet bedroom with a barely there tone, it turns vigilance into discomfort. But the hardware is only half the conflict. The firmware matters, the way the brain decides what to attend to. Brains don't wait for perfect signals, they predict. When a low-frequency pattern is ambiguous, too weak to be a clear tone, too steady to be random, the auditory system throws a soft alert. The limbic system, which handles threat and emotion, checks in. If you've slept badly for 3 nights and you're worried the hum will return, anxiety turns the gain up. That extra gain makes the pattern stand out more. The loop closes. Perception fuels anxiety. Anxiety amplifies perception. It's the auditory-limbic feedback loop. You're not imagining the sensation, you're reinforcing its salience. Get this, 2 people in the same room can have different loops. A coworker told us about a factory tour. 6 of them stood near a bank of industrial fans. They all had to shout to talk, but only 2 felt a band of pressure across the chest and a sudden urge to step back. Later, those 2 would both say they also get carsick easily. The others shrugged and joked about the noise. Same stimulus, different nervous systems, different stories. Genes and hormones nudge the sliders too. Migraine runs in families, and a subset of migraine genes is tied to sensory thresholds. Women in midlife show up in hum narratives, more than chance would predict, which might reflect hormone-linked shifts in vestibular sensitivity and sleep architecture. None of this makes the experience all in your head. It situates it in a brain-body system that's designed to prioritize survival and sometimes over-indexes. Think about the eyes for a second. In the last chapter, we talked about ocular resonance near 18 × 9/8 Hz. In a sensitive person, a room that emphasizes that band might create tiny visual quivers and a slow body pressure cue at once. The predictive brain looks for a cause and doesn't find one. That mismatch is uncomfortable. If you've already labeled the mismatch the hum that ruins my sleep, your limbic system tags it as important before you're even fully aware it's back. The loop bites faster. Now add context. You've read forum threads, you've tracked patterns, you've moved furniture, and noticed a small improvement. You're trying to control something you can't see, and control is a deeply human need. The moment a faint vibration appears, your brain pulls last week's file and says, "Here we go." That expectation shifts thresholds. It doesn't create the stimulus, but it lowers the bar for detecting it. Predictive coding is efficient most days. Here, it backfires. There's a social layer too. Partners who don't feel it get tired of rearranged bedrooms and late-night walks. Bosses don't accept "my house is humming" as a reason for foggy mornings. Doctors, trained to think in decibels and audiograms, say hearing is normal. All true, and it leaves sufferers isolated. Isolation itself cranks the limbic gain. You can watch someone's world shrink to the shape of their bedroom because that's where the battle is. This is why the 2% figure matters. In Taos, a survey suggested roughly that slice could hear a local hum. It isn't a supernatural club. It's a distribution tale. People whose anatomy, vestibular sensitivity, and predictive brain settings line up. They are not making it up. They're detecting more. And under certain conditions, that detection spirals into distress. What do you do with a loop? You break it in more than one place. Adjust the room so it's less cooperative. Adjust routines so sleep pressure outweighs late-night vigilance. Adjust the brain's expectations so the pattern loses threat value. We'll get there. First, we need a better map of the external signal itself. If bodies can sense it, where is it coming from? And how does it travel across continents and through walls? Natural engines, Earth's low-frequency choir. While Michael, Denise, and Sam were tearing apart bedrooms, the planet was singing under them. Not loudly, not like thunder, more like breath. The ocean was the biggest instrument. Far offshore, winter seas sent storm trains across the Atlantic and Pacific. Where counter-rolling wave groups met, they beat together and pushed on the air above them, making microbaromes, ultra-low pressure pulses around 1/10 to half a hertz. Too slow to hear, but strong enough to travel thousands of kilometers. Some of that energy pressed the seafloor and shook the crust. The Earth answered with microsisms, the constant murmur that seismologists read like weather. On the longest timescales, the planet carries a true hum, periods of 30 seconds to minutes, excited by ocean gravity waves. You'll never notice that directly. But between the seafloor, the air, and whatever building you live in, there are handshakes. Energy shifts bands as it crosses interfaces. A storm deepens over the North Atlantic. Long-period swell grows, microbaromes bloom, and downstream you find a tone inside a room that wasn't there in summer. Volcanoes add their own voices when they're active. Even without exploding, vents breathe. Gas jets and magma motion rumble below 20 hertz and can radiate across hundreds of kilometers, especially when the atmosphere cooperates. Most nights you won't hear Etna from Bristol. But if a volcano is restless, infrasound arrays light up, and somewhere, some room with the right dimensions hums a little stronger. Lightning and jet streams sculpt the background too. Thunder carries a long tail of low-frequency energy, fast-moving air layers over slow ones, and they trade momentum through waves you can't see, but can sometimes feel as pressure drift. Those pressure waves, like the ocean's microbaromes, don't stop at your door. They press on roofs and siding, they push through vents. The house doesn't care whether the source is salt water or sky. It responds as a resonator all the same. Now remember the diaries. Worse at night, worse in winter. Patterns that seem to snap on at fixed hours. Nature has clocks. Ocean storms in the northern hemisphere peak in winter. Microbarome source maps glow brightest in the North Atlantic and North Pacific then. Night brings calmer local winds and less turbulent air near the ground, which can let infrasonic waves bend and travel farther with less scattering. Indoors, the drop in masking noise makes steady low patterns stand out. A very small external driver becomes a felt presence, precisely when you're trying to sleep. In some regions, people have noticed their hum season. Coastal communities talk about autumn nights when the swell rises and the air feels heavy. Inland, when big storm systems roll through, a few hearers brace. This isn't consistent everywhere. Local geography matters. Ridges, valleys, and urban canyons bend slow waves like lenses. A cul-de-sac aligned with prevailing winds and open to the distant sea might be a better collector than the street behind it. Here's where the room starts to matter again. Long wavelengths don't care about furniture. They fit across whole rooms. If your bedroom's longest dimension supports a standing wave at a low harmonic that lines up with the incoming energy, pressure will pile up at the walls and corners. Move your head half a meter and the sensation changes. Add a vent or chimney, a small opening to a larger volume, and you've built a Helmholtz resonator. Blow across a bottle and you hear a note. Push a slow pressure rhythm across a vent and the house favors one low band. Basements are notorious for this because they're boxy, stiff, and connected to the outside through just a few openings. A microbarometer that would have passed through as a shrug finds a cavity that answers back. Seismic. Coupling adds another path. Microseisms shake foundations by tiny amounts. You won't notice the ground itself, but the energy can climb the structure. Floors and walls flex a hair, and that motion couples into the air inside. Even if the air pressure signal from the sky is weak, the building can create one of its own from the ground. Two faint drivers, airborne and structure-borne, stack just enough to cross a sensitive person's threshold. Of course, when you're awake at 3:07 a.m., you're not thinking about ocean wave interactions and atmospheric ducting. You're thinking about the corner where your chest tightens. But zoomed out, the timing matches the planet's low-end schedule. This explains why Taos has a season, why Bristol's letters spiked in certain months, why Sam's calendar marks cluster. Nature hums constantly, yet it modulates with weather, swell, and wind. The house is a filter, not a shield. None of this means every case is natural. It means that even before we layer on machines, the baseline is active. The sea, the sky, and the crust run a choir below hearing, and a small group of bodies are tuned close enough to catch the beat when rooms lend them a hand. When people say it's worse inside, they're describing room physics responding to faraway weather. When they say it starts after midnight, they're describing propagation and masking, not madness. And yet, once you hear the earth, you start noticing a second voice. Over the last century, we've added new bass instruments, fans, grids, pumps, that play on top of the old song. The natural choir sets the stage.
Industrial
Modern
baseline.
life brings the melody
Infrastructure
you can't see. While nature keeps a steady floor, industry lays a grid on top of it. You don't see it, but once you know where to listen, it's everywhere. Transformers, pumps, giant fans, cooling towers, data centers breathing all night. The sound isn't just in the air, it rides steel, soil, and concrete, slips through foundations, then blooms inside rooms that like those notes. Start with the power grid. Every city hums at 50 or 60 hertz, depending on where you live. That's above classic infrasound, but real equipment doesn't sing a single clean note. Transformers produce subharmonics and modulation products, sidebands that dip below 20 hertz, especially when the load changes. At night, when demand shifts and control systems adjust, those low components wobble. If you're near a substation or a big feeder line, the walls don't just hear that, they carry it. Then there are the lungs of buildings, large fans and compressors. Hospitals, malls, high-rises, and server farms push astonishing volumes of air and water. Big axial fans with long blades can produce powerful tonals under 20 hertz, especially when blade pass frequencies and structural resonances dance together. The fans are often mounted on rooftops or in mechanical rooms bolted to the frame. That energy doesn't stay politely in the duct. It migrates into floors and joists, then into rooms that were never designed to ignore a slow throb. Data centers, new to many neighborhoods, stack this effect. Racks of servers make heat. Heat demands cooling. Cooling means banks of fans and chillers that never sleep. The units modulate with load so the low end breathes. People who live a block away don't hear whirring. They feel a room press and release in a way you can't point at. Inspector shows up at noon, listens for a minute, declares it fine. At 2 a.m., the load curve slides and the baseline returns. Pipelines too. High-pressure gas lines and long water mains use pumps and regulators that create pulsations. The ground itself becomes a waveguide. You don't need to live next to a pumping station to get a taste. The energy can couple into building foundations miles away. In winter, when soil is stiffer and the air's density shifts, the coupling changes. People swear the hum moved to their street. In some sense, it did, through the ground. Wind turbines get argued about a lot. What's clear is that large turbines produce a complex low-frequency signature, including infrasound, and that amplitude modulation, the thump-thump as blades pass the tower, can irritate even at modest sound pressure levels. Some residents near wind farms report sleep disruption that correlates with certain wind conditions and turbine orientations. Not everyone feels it. Some do, and they describe the same chest pressure and unease that show up in city cases. Here's the story that took the hum from rumor to hardware. Windsor, Ontario. Around 2011, residents across the river from Detroit began reporting a heavy, intermittent rumble. Windows rattled, people lost sleep. The press called it the Windsor Hum. Researchers deployed sensors and found a low-frequency signature that came and went, bending with wind and temperature layers over the river. The lines of evidence pointed across the water to Zug Island, an industrial site with U.S. steel operations. Blast furnaces and steelmaking are not quiet arts. They move huge volumes of air and material, and periodic processes can generate strong, low-frequency components. The team couldn't plant instruments on the island itself, but the correlation was strong enough that when operations paused, the hum eased. When they resumed, it returned. 2 cities, 1 baseline, traded across a border. That's a rare case where public data, resident logs, and industrial cycles lined up without relying on folklore. Stories like that explain why some nights are worse than others. Industrial systems follow diurnal cycles. At night, there's less traffic and less general noise, so masking falls away. Grid loads shift as air conditioners cycle down and heating systems kick in. Maintenance routines run at off-peak hours. A neighbor's building chillers enter a different control mode. A data center spins up redundancy for a scheduled test. The baseline lifts just enough to cross a sensitive threshold, and in your bedroom, the walls take that faint push and make a standing wave out of it. Officials often show up with A-weighted meters, the same curve used to protect hearing in workplaces. It's great for mid-range noise that damages ears. It rolls off the lows that bother bodies. So a printout says, within limits, and the resident who hasn't slept in a week feels dismissed. That gap in measurement is a character in almost every hum saga. If the energy is mostly structure-borne, vibration riding beams and slabs, an air microphone underreads it anyway. Put an accelerometer on the floor, and a different picture appears. Curiosity hook. What if the quietest room on a report is the loudest room to your nervous system? Think back to Denise on the bedroom carpet. She didn't need a spectrogram to find the hot spot. Her body did it. Walk, pause, feel the pressure notch change. That's a building telling you it's been drafted into an orchestra it didn't audition for. It's why moving a bed off a floor joist or decoupling it with elastomer pads can buy back a few hours of sleep. It's why a vent cap can shift a room's favorite note. Quick test to hook. Try a temporary flue cover for 1 night and diary the wake time. Does your 307 move? Industrial baselines don't have to be loud in an absolute sense to be invasive in a specific place. They have to be steady, they have to be low, and they have to meet a room that agrees. When that happens, the sound isn't out there anymore. It's under you, around you, and if you're in the 2%, inside you, measuring a sound nobody hears. Michael kept a printout from the city inspector. Compliant. Awaited leak within limits. He stared at the curve on the back that dipped hard below 20 hertz, the part his body kept complaining about. Denise had the same graph from Bristol, different logo, same dismissal. If your tool ignores the thing that hurts you, the result looks clean. That was the turning point. Stop asking the wrong instrument the right question. They learned a new vocabulary at 3 a.m. Awaiting mimics the ear and throws away the lows. C weighting is better but still rolls off. Z weighting is flat, no filter, and that's where infrasound lives. For air pressure, you need a microbarometer, not a cheap SPL meter. For structure-borne energy, you need accelerometers glued to floors and walls. The hum doesn't choose one path. It rides whatever's easiest. Sam built a rig from parts the internet taught him to name. A microbarometer in a weatherproof box outside to catch the air. A triaxial accelerometer taped to the bedroom slab to catch vibration. Both fed a little data logger that could stare for hours and not blink. He set the system to run long FFTs, mathematical lenses that turn time into frequency, so stable tones would show up as needle-thin lines instead of blurs. Overnight, the house would tell its story. The first night felt like fishing. In the morning, he opened the spectrogram and saw an ocean of color, most of it dull. Then a narrow line at 16.7 hertz, steady from 140 to 315, with faint side bands pulsing a few tenths of a hertz apart. Modulation. Something upstream was breathing. The accelerometer showed a matching line in the floor, a few decibels stronger than the air. That meant structure-borne energy was leading the dance. Meanwhile, Denise kept a symptom diary next to her bed. Time to bed, time awake, chest pressure from 0 to 10, nausea yes or no. She didn't tell her body about Sam's graphs. She didn't want to prime the loop. After a week, they overlaid the logs. On the nights, the 16 to 18 hertz line was sharp and clean. Her wake-ups clustered within 15 minutes of the line's onset. When the line smeared or vanished, she slept. Not perfect, enough to matter. They noticed something else. Nights with strong, low lines also showed little ripples in heart rate variability. Sam wore a cheap chest strap that fed numbers into his phone. He didn't see a giant spike, just a consistent dip in vagal tone when the tonal event started. The autonomic nervous system leaning away from rest and digest. It fit the lab stories they'd read. Low-frequency exposure, nudging stress markers in sensitive people. They weren't proving causation in a courtroom. They were assembling a map that matched their bodies. Michael took the DIY kit further. He set the microbarometer outside, facing away from the house, and added a second one inside, near the bedroom vent. If the tone was coming mostly through air, the indoor and outdoor traces would march together. If the building was making its own low note from vibration, indoor would lead or bloom while outdoor stayed quiet. On one of the worst nights, the indoor trace lit up while the outdoor stayed nearly flat. He put an accelerometer on the ductwork and found the line there too. The house wasn't just a microphone, it was a bass instrument. They learned how to hunt on spectrograms. A diesel generator tone looks like a narrow stripe with tidy harmonics. A big fan can show a blade pass family with sidebands that widen when load varies. A transformer's world is tied to the grid. The main 50-60 hertz peak and lower subharmonics that wobble with demand. Microbaromes, nature's slow beat, live far below, but sometimes their energy rides up through room modes that sit near the haunted band. Once your eye learns the patterns, your ear stops being the only witness. Then came the wall they kept hitting. Proof isn't policy. Below 20 hertz, regulations are foggy. Most ordinances speak dBA and occupational limits. When Michael sent the Z-weighted plots and acceleration spectra to the city, the reply was polite confusion. We don't have a standard for this. The steel door that shuts a lot of cases isn't denial, it's missing language. So they aim for practical wins. Move the bed off that floor joist that rings at 17. Decouple it with dense rubber. Seal the gap around the vent that acted like a bottle mouth. Add mass to the wall that vibrated most on the accelerometer trace. It wasn't home renovation as art, it was acoustics as first aid. The next spectrogram showed the line softer by a few decibels. Denise's diary shifted from 3 wake-ups to 1. Still there, less power. Not everyone needs a lab in the living room. You can start with a phone and a long recording, even if the mic rolls off low. You're not measuring pressure, you're logging time. Note when you wake, when you move rooms, when it eases outside. If you see a clockwork pattern, you're not imagining a rhythm. If a single step changes your symptoms, your house has a hotspot. That's data. The lesson wasn't that the hum is simple to catch. It was that you have to ask the right questions in the right way. The sound you can't hear shows up if you look where it lives. In long windows, in flat weightings, in the bones of your home, and in the beat of your own nervous system. And once you can see it even a little, you can start to change it. Rooms as resonators. Why it's louder inside. From their logs, a weird constant kept surfacing. Step outside and the pressure lifts. Step back in and the hum grows teeth. That isn't imagination, it's geometry. Long wavelengths don't care about your decor. At 17 to 19 hertz, a single cycle is the length of a room. When slow waves meet parallel walls, they set up standing patterns, room modes, where pressure piles up at specific spots and thins at others. Corners and along walls are hotspots. The longest dimension of a room decides the strongest low note. The second and third dimensions add their own. You don't need ears to find them. Your chest will. Michael mapped his bedroom by feel. Start at the door. Pressure 3 out of 10. 2 steps toward the window. 5. At the wardrobe. 7. He moved his pillow 30 inches and for the first time in weeks slept past 2 a.m. The accelerometer agreed. A narrow line near 17 hertz rose 3 decibels at the window wall and fell at mid-room. The house was drawing a contour map he could walk. Denise had a different puzzle. Her worst pressure lived near a small gas fireplace with a flue. She'd sealed the obvious gaps, but the sensation kept pulsing, like breath. A neighbor mentioned bottle tones. That sent her down the path of Helmholtz resonance, the physics of a cavity with a small opening. Blow across a bottle and it chooses one note. A room attached to a vent or chimney can do the same at very low frequencies. Small opening, big volume, plus just the right dimensions, and you've built a giant bass port. On nights with strong, low energy outside, the vent acted like a mouth. She added a dense, gasketed cap to the flue and sealed a leaky return grill with proper mastic. Her diary dropped a notch the next week. Sam's accelerometer told a different secret. Structure. The floor joist under his bed lit up at the same frequency that bothered his chest. The air microphone barely twitched, but the wood moved. That motion pumped the air in the room and turned the floor into the source. He slid the bed off the joist bay that rang the most and placed dense elastomer pads under the legs. Small decouplers that make it harder for vibration to climb into a frame. He didn't silence the line on the spectrogram. He shaved it. His body noticed. Here's the part that feels like a magic trick until you've seen it work. One step changes everything. Move your head half a meter and your body drops from a pressure antinode to a node, from crest to trough. You're not defeating the source, you're walking the pattern. That's why the hum can be worse inside than out. Outside, low energy disperses into open space. Inside, rigid boundaries trap and reinforce it along the room's favorite axes. The longer the dimension, the lower the note. Basements, with stiff walls and few openings, are especially good at answering low pushes with their own slow replies. Ductwork and framing don't sit on the sidelines either. Long metal runs behave like waveguides. A blower that's quiet at noon can become a low-frequency pump at night when control modes shift. Even when the fan is off, a long duct connected to the outdoors can host a Helmholtz effect with the room it feeds. Seal the unintended openings, add mass to panels that flex, and the favored note drifts or fades. None of this requires a studio's worth of treatment. Start with movement. Map the hotspots by walking and pausing. If a corner grips your chest, don't sleep there. If a vent hums, test a temporary cover for one night. If the bed sits over a lively joist, rotate it or decouple it. Bass traps built for music studios won't touch 17 hertz unless they're enormous, but added mass, thicker drywall, constrained layer damping on resonant panels can lower and spread a stubborn peak. The practical insight lands hard. This is physics, not a haunting. Your house is an instrument, tuned by its dimensions and leaks, played by forces you can't see. Change the instrument even a little, and the song changes with it. The global hum myth versus many local hums. The phrase global hum sounds tidy. One mysterious bass line wrapping the planet. That's how the story spread online. Pins on a map, red dots clustering from Bristol to Taos to Auckland. A single ghost with a passport. But when investigators walked the streets and crawled through basements, the neat headline fell apart. Most hotspots had their own local engine, their own room that liked one note, their own season when the background lined up just right. Take Taos. In the early 90s, enough residents complained that a team from Los Alamos, Sandia, and the University of New Mexico showed up with gear. They found a few hearers, roughly 2%, who could point to a low presence, but not to a smoking machine. Measurements caught fragments. Tones here, traffic there, occasional industrial signatures, plenty of nothing. The conclusion wasn't cosmic, it was messy. A patchwork of weak sources, room interactions, and sensitive listeners. The town didn't have one hum. It had many small ones that only some people could feel. Bristol's letters in the 70s looked global from a distance because they were loud in print. Hundreds wrote to the paper about a nighttime rumble. Inspectors traced individual cases to ventilation plants, factory fans, even a neighbor's heating system. Some were fixed, others were never pinned down or faded when maintenance cycles shifted. The myth hardened because people who heard it kept talking, and people who didn't stayed quiet. Survivorship bias built a worldwide monster out of many local gremlins. Then there's Windsor, Ontario, the clearest case of a hum with a postal address. Residents across the river from Detroit began losing sleep. Windows shook. The sound came and went like weather. Researchers set up sensors and found a strong, low-frequency signature that bent with atmospheric layers over the river. The finger pointed towards Zug Island, where heavy steel operations ran. When those operations paused, the hum often eased. When they resumed, it returned. Not a global curse, a cross-border baseline riding air and steel. It was proof that you can feel an engine you can't see if your house and the night agree to amplify it. Zoom out and the pattern repeats. West Seattle tied reports to a vacuum pump on docked ships. Kokomo, Indiana traced 2 tones to industrial equipment, air compressors and cooling systems. Sausalito blamed fish mating calls for a seasonal drone. In each place, the global hum shrank into a handful of local notes, plus the planet's quiet choir underneath. What made it feel global wasn't a single source. It was the internet collecting scattered stories into one feed, and our brains connecting dots into a face. There's another twist in that illusion, the 2%. If only a small slice of people are sensitive, then the data set is self-selecting. Forums fill with the same descriptors: diesel, idling, worse inside after midnight, because the same kinds of bodies are reacting to the same kinds of physics. That consistency makes it feel like one thing. In reality, it's many things that rhyme. Curiosity gap. Could your one hum disappear if you changed nothing but room geometry? This reframing matters for the people living it. If you're told the cause is everywhere and nowhere, you move houses and carry the hum with you. If you're told it's all in your head, you stop asking for help. But if you're shown that each hotspot likely has a local driver layered on top of weather and room geometry, you can aim fixes. Seal that vent, nudge that bed, log that nighttime load cycle at the plant 3 blocks over. Residents become investigators, not believers or deniers. The myth isn't useless. It kept people from thinking they were alone. It pushed journalists and scientists to listen. But the solution doesn't live in a single global switch. It lives in mosaics. A transformer here, a fan there, a winter swell, a poorly damped joist, a sensitive vestibular system, and a brain trained by too many bad nights. Respect the experience, refine the target, and the monster turns back into parts. And yet, even inside that mosaic, one number keeps showing up in human stories: 17-something hertz. Whether the source is ocean weather climbing a room mode or industrial modulation slipping under the radar, that haunted band sits where bodies react. The next question is why that frequency feels like fear. The 17 hertz legend and the fear response. There's a number that keeps slipping into diaries and lab notes. 17-something hertz. It sits in that gray zone where you don't hear a pitch so much as feel a presence. And it lines up with a quirk of biology that turns a faint vibration into a mood. The eyeball's resonance, measured near 18.98 hertz. Your eyes are small, fluid-filled spheres with elastic walls. At certain low frequencies, they can micro-oscillate. Motions too subtle to see in a mirror, but real enough to tug on the retina. When that happens, the visual system gets tiny mechanical nudges that don't come from light. People don't describe images. They describe shadows, flickers, a sense that something moved at the edge. Now put that in the same room with a steady low band pressure. The brain's threat circuits pay attention. Not because you believe in ghosts, but because your hardware just generated ambiguity in the 2 senses you trust most. Controlled exposures get at this, without the folklore. In studies where volunteers sit through tones that skim the bottom of audibility, a subset shows small, consistent shifts around this band. Heart rate creeps up. Skin conductance ticks higher. Self-reported unease climbs a notch. Not everyone. Enough to matter. When researchers sneak a low component into otherwise normal audio, more people report tension or sorrow without putting a finger on why. It's not mind control. It's salience, the body flagging a pattern that doesn't resolve. Perfect fuel for a viral "why do I feel weird here" moment. This bleeds into culture because we build stories around feelings we can't name. Old mills, long corridors, basements with the exact dimensions to favor a low mode. All get reputations. Someone walks in and feels the pressure rise a hair, sees a peripheral quiver their eyes produced, and their limbic system assigns a label from the local menu: haunted, cursed, wrong. Tell 10 people, and 3 will feel it too. The other 7 will be bored and wonder what you're talking about. Same room, different nervous systems. For Michael, the number became personal. After weeks of logging, the most stubborn line in his spectrogram sat near 17 hertz. On those nights, he also wrote shadows in the margin, his shorthand for a split-second sense of movement when he stared at the dark. He didn't believe in apparitions. He did believe his body. The next morning, his chest strap showed the same slight dip in vagal tone he'd seen before. He stopped thinking haunted and started thinking ocular plus autonomic. Denise noticed it in a simpler way. On the night she woke with that band around her head, she was more likely to snap awake again at the smallest noise. Her partner's breath, a car outside, a phone lighting the ceiling, everything felt like too much. That's the limbic system once it's primed. The first low-frequency nudge raises the gain. Once it's up, unrelated inputs feel sharper. People call it being on edge. In a lab, you'd call it arousal. Meanwhile, Sam ran a clean experiment at home. He played a slow sweep through a long throw sub at the lowest level he could set and still register any sensation. He kept his eyes closed, sat still, and asked his partner to stop the slider at random spots. When she hovered around 17 to 19 hertz, he reported a tightness behind the eyes and a vague unease he didn't feel at, say, 23. When they repeated it a week later with the sub behind a wall to reduce expectation, the pattern stayed. It didn't prove cause for his bad nights. It did show that his system had a soft spot. None of this means 17 hertz is a curse frequency that dooms anyone who meets it. It's a band where multiple systems stack. Visual micro-oscillation, vestibular sensitivity to slow sway, chest and abdominal resonance, autonomic watchfulness, add a room that prefers that note, and an upstream source that breathes near it, industrial modulation or distant weather, and you have a reliable recipe for discomfort in a slice of people. So the legend has a spine. Ghost rooms can be rooms with bad low acoustics. Stories of dread can be bodies reacting to a weak, steady stimulus at a sensitive frequency. Sufferers aren't superstitious, they're sensitive detectors, which raises a practical question with real hope attached. If the nervous system is the amplifier, can you detune it so the same low pattern lands softer, even when the external world doesn't change? And the room. The fix starts small, because small changes move big waves when rooms cooperate. Begin with exposure hygiene. If the hum is strongest in a basement or a ground floor corner, sleep upstairs where long wavelengths have fewer rigid boundaries and lose some bite. Put the bed away from exterior walls and major corners. Those are pressure hotspots. If a hallway feels calmer, use it. You're not being dramatic. You're following the map your body already drew. Location scouting matters more than detour. Spend one evening listening by walking. Lights low, house quiet. Stand in each corner for 30 seconds. Sit on the bed, then on the floor at mid-room. Step into the closet, then the hallway. Note where your chest loosens. That's your first target zone for sleep. Michael realized the center of his room, 1 meter off the longest wall, was the only spot he could breathe easily at 2 a.m. He spun the bed so his head landed there. 2 hours returned. Next, take the room out of the bandit loves. Add mass to panels that flex. A second layer of drywall with damping compound on the wall that lit up on the accelerometer. A solid core door instead of a hollow one. Dense curtains over leaky windows. Seal the tiny gaps that make giant base ports. Use proper mastic on duct joints and weather strip on vent covers. If a fireplace flue connects to a coal chimney, install a tight gasketed cap you can remove for use. You're shrinking the Helmholtz effect, making the bottle mouth less effective, so the favored note softens. Decouple what touches you. If floor vibration drives the sensation, break the path into the bed. Place dense elastomer pads or isolation pucks under the bed legs. If the frame is light, add weight so it doesn't move as easily. Sandbags under the slats, a heavier mattress base. Move the bed off the joist bay that rang most in your walking test. If your headboard touches a wall, pull it an inch off. A rigid tie into a pressure hotspot is an invitation to feel every cycle. Bass traps for music studios won't fix 17 hertz unless they're enormous. But you can cheat physics at the edges. Heavy, limp mass barriers. Mass-loaded vinyl behind drywall. Lower and broaden peaks by making panels harder to drive. Constrained layer damping on rumbling sheet metal, a duct that sings. can erase a narrow tone enough that your room mode has nothing steady to lock onto. You're not building a silent room. You're removing the anchor points that let a faint external push become a resident note. Kill the room's own engines. If an HVAC fan or mini split enters a control mode at night that adds a slow throb, change the schedule. Switch to a constant low setting rather than a cycling high one. Add flexible connectors to isolate fans from rigid ductwork. Ensure compressors and pumps sit on proper isolation mounts, not straight on concrete. If a neighbor's rooftop unit is the likely source, document timing and politely share data. Sometimes a vibration pad or a belt replacement solves a feud marketed as a mystery. Then detune the body. The same nervous system that cranks the gain can learn to let go. Sleep anchoring helps. A strict wind-down routine that starts well before the hour the hum usually arrives. Dim lights, no news, a hot shower to drop core temperature, then into bed with a consistent breath pattern. Box breathing, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, gives the autonomic system a fixed metronome that competes with the slow external one. If you wake at 3:07, don't chase the room. Sit up, feet on the floor, breathe to a count, and wait 2 minutes. You're teaching the loop that the cue doesn't equal danger. Vestibular rehab isn't just for dizzy clinics. A therapist can prescribe gaze stabilization and habituation exercises that make the inner ear less jumpy to slow, conflicting inputs. 10 minutes a day can lift the floor of tolerance. Migraine protocols, hydration, regular meals, magnesium if your doctor agrees, light control in the evening, reduce the chance that a sensitized brain tags the hum as a migraine trigger. For some, low-dose preventatives used for vestibular migraine change how often the loop bites. Sound can fight sound. Masking with standard white noise doesn't reach 17 hertz, but what it does is blur salience. A steady, low fan or broadband brown noise reduces the contrast that makes the hum stand out. Some use very low-frequency generators to add a gentle, unmodulated floor below the room's favorite band, nudging the system away from the exact frequency that bothers them. That's delicate work. Too loud and you worsen it. Start minimal. The goal isn't to drown anything. It's to desynchronize the brain's lock-on. Cognitive tools matter because expectation shapes detection. A brief course of CBT tuned for sound sensitivity reframes the night. The cue is real, the consequence is controllable. You build replacement thoughts you can actually believe. This is my room, boosting a weak tone. My body can ride this, paired with actions you practice while calm. You're not arguing with sensation. You're lowering its threat value so the limbic gain drops. Here's a micro story that stitches it together. Denise capped her flu, sealed a leaky return, and slid dense pads under her bed legs. She moved the head of the bed to mid-room and taped a cheap accelerometer to the floor to confirm the worst joist wasn't under her anymore. She set a lights-out routine, no phone after 10, hot shower, breath count, and met a vestibular therapist who gave her 2 exercises. The first week, she still woke at 3:15, but the panic didn't spike. By week 3, her diary showed 1 wake-up most nights and none on 3 of them. The hum didn't vanish. Its power did. Small wins compound. Each decibel shaved, each expectation softened, each hotspot avoided, adds up to a night that belongs to you again. And once you feel that, even once, the loop that kept you prisoner starts to unlock. Policy, standards, and the missing data problem. By the time Denise's diary calmed down, another pattern stood out. Every official letter carried the same blind spot. The forms spoke O-weighting, workplace exposure, mid-band noise. None of them had a place for a 17 hertz line that woke you at 3:07 a.m. Without a box to tick, the story kept falling through. Standards didn't mean to ignore people like her. They grew where most harm lived. Occupational rules were built to stop hearing loss, so they focused on the band that shreds hair cells, not the band that nudges a nervous system. Cities borrowed those curves for nuisance complaints. The result was a neat bureaucracy that missed the low end by design. Planning missed it too. Environmental impact reports modeled traffic roar in aircraft corridors, not sub-20 hertz propagation through valleys or across rivers at night. Building codes chased energy efficiency and fire safety. They rarely asked how a rigid, boxy basement connected to a vent might amplify a distant microbarometer into a bedroom tone. A few acousticians cared. Most plans sailed past. When residents did the work themselves, Z-weighted plots, accelerometers, symptom logs, their evidence landed in gray space. "We don't have a standard for this," the reply said. Nobody wanted to set a number that industry would challenge or that couldn't be enforced. Meanwhile, people like Sam learned to sleep between room modes. So what would a better system look like? Start by measuring what hurts. Require Z-weighted noise surveys, not just A-weighted, for complaints that mention low-frequency qualities, rumble, pressure, worse inside. Add vibration criteria, peak particle velocity or acceleration in residential settings, not just for heavy construction. Give inspectors microbarometers and triaxial accelerometers and teach them to run long windows at night. Tease to action. 1 week of overnight logging can do more than a dozen daytime site visits. Tie measurements to time. A single midday snapshot is theater. Mandate overnight logging for a week when a complaint alleges diurnal patterns. Spectrograms, not just averages. So narrow tonals and modulation sidebands show. If industry says not us, align logs to operational data under confidentiality. Fan speeds, pump cycles, load changes. You don't need a public fight to see if the lines dance together. Update planning. For major HVAC installations, data centers, and substations near residences, require low-frequency modeling and mitigation in design. Isolation mounts, flexible connectors, structural decoupling, and enclosure mass that targets the bottom octave. In zoning, recognize that basements, courtyards, and urban canyons can trap lows. Cite loud, slow machines with that in mind. Give residents a pathway short of litigation. Create a tiered response. Preliminary screening with proper tools. If low-frequency components are evident, a cooperative mitigation phase with small fixes first. Belts, mounts, control modes, before big money moves. Share results plainly. Here's the line. Here's when it appears. Here's what we changed. Here's how many decibels it dropped. Protect the sensitive while science catches up. Health guidance can acknowledge that a minority experiences sleep disruption and stress symptoms at low levels without claiming universal hazard. Doctors can be briefed. Normal audiograms don't rule out low-frequency sensitivity. Cognitive and vestibular supports help. That reframes visits from dismissal to management. There's a missing map, too. Cities rarely maintain baseline low-frequency profiles across seasons. Without them, every new complaint starts at zero. A small network of microbarometers and vibration sensors distributed across neighborhoods could build a public atlas. Winter ridge lines, nocturnal ducks, industrial signatures. It's cheaper than the hours lost to sleeplessness and hearings that go nowhere. The point isn't to put a warning label on 17 hertz. It's to stop pretending that a band we didn't count doesn't count. Once you measure the lows, language follows. Once you log nights, patterns speak. And once policy admits that rooms and bodies respond below hearing, fixes stop looking like favors and start looking like maintenance. For Michael, Denise, and Sam, none of this rewrites the nights they lost. But imagine if the first inspector had arrived with the right tools, run a week of data, and said, "We see it, here's what we can try." That one sentence would have turned a mystery into a plan. New frontiers, mapping Earth's low end. The turning point came when their living room labs stopped feeling like outliers and started looking like prototypes. If a handful of sleepless people could sketch a local baseline with a microbarometer and an accelerometer, what could a city do with a network? That's where the new frontier lives, turning a mystery into a map. Start with ears in the sky. Infrasound arrays, clusters of microbarometers spaced across fields or rooftops. Listen for pressure, pulses far below hearing. They've been used for decades to track nuclear tests and volcanic rumbles. Now, smaller, cheaper sensors make it possible to seed neighborhoods. 4 sensors in a rough square can triangulate direction. More can estimate distance by timing the tiny lag between arrivals. You don't get a pretty picture on day one. You get lines and bearings that, over weeks, sketch corridors where low-frequency energy tends to travel at night. Pair that with the ground's own whispers. Seismometers in the broadband class hear microseisms, those constant wiggles from ocean wave action, down to long periods. Put a few lightweight instruments in basements and utility vaults, and you can tell when structure-borne energy is rising, even if the air is quiet. The trick is fusing sky and ground. When both rise together, a big regional driver is at work. When the floor sings and the sky stays flat, A local machine or coupling path is doing most of the work. The raw data is ugly in the best way. Long spectrograms, days stacked on days, thin needles and blurry clouds. Humans can spot repeating stripes, but machines don't blink. Feed months of overnight, logs into a model trained to recognize signatures. Narrow tonals with sidebands that drift with load, industrial fans, transformers. Breathy broadband swells that wax with storms, microbaromes. Periodic bursts tied to thunder, and it starts labeling the lows. Not with absolute certainty, but with enough confidence to say, this neighborhood's 2 o'clock line often aligns with the substation's tap changes. That one rides the winter swell. Meanwhile, buildings grow nervous systems of their own. Digital twins, computer models that mirror a structure's geometry, materials, and mechanical systems, have gotten good at mid and high-frequency acoustics. Extend them down into the bottom octave, and you can predict where a slow wave will pile up. Input the room dimensions, wall stiffness, duct runs, and flues, and the twin returns a low-frequency mode map, a list of favorite notes, and hotspots you can walk to. Before drywall goes up, a designer can see a 17 Hz trap forming in the future bedroom and adjust dimensions or add damping where it counts. Communities are already testing the pieces. In one coastal town, a volunteer group borrowed university sensors and planted a microbarometer every few blocks. They ran all winter, then overlaid the traces on buoy data, wind fields, and power grid load curves. Nights with strong North Atlantic swell showed consistent rises in the lowest bands. Nights when a nearby industrial park ramped chillers for maintenance drew narrow, higher bands with tidy sidebands. Residents who kept diaries, timestamps, and one-line notes saw their wake-ups cluster with the labeled events. The map wasn't a cure, but it was a mirror. It took the gaslighting out of the night. Elsewhere, a data center operator partnered with neighbors. They agreed to share anonymized operational data, fan speeds, pump states, under a non-disclosure, aligned to timestamps. A city acoustician ran a month of Z-weighted and vibration logging at 3 homes. The machine learning model flagged a recurring 17.2 Hz line with modulation at about 0.7 Hz. The operational log showed a control mode that ramped condenser fans in a slow sawtooth overnight. A firmware tweak flattened the ramp, the modulation sideband shrank, and 2 households slept. It wasn't an admission of guilt, it was maintenance guided by a map. The same logic works inside a single house. Sam built a crude digital twin of his bedroom. Dimensions, wall layers, joist spacing, duct location, flue volume, vent area. He fed in the outdoor microbarometer band as an input and watched the model bloom at 17-ish in the corner he already hated. He added a flue cap and a layer of damping to the thin return plenum in the model, and the predicted hotspot faded. Then he did it in wood and metal. The next. Weak spectrograms matched the prediction within a few decibels. The satisfaction wasn't just the sleep, it was seeing cause and effect land where folklore used to live. Scaling this takes more than gadgets, it needs trust. An open portal where residents can drop symptom timestamps without sharing identities. A city map that shows low-frequency baselines over seasons, not to scare anyone, but to normalize the idea that the low end moves with weather and load. Clear language, not alarms, but explanations. Tonight's swell and wind profile may raise low-frequency background from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. For the 2%, that's not trivia, it's planning. Move bedtime earlier, sleep in the hallway, expect a wave, and meet it with a routine. Over time, the maps teach everybody something bigger. They show that the low end isn't one monster. It's a landscape with ridges and valleys, with seasonal rivers and industrial canals. Sensitive people aren't seers. They're hikers who feel the terrain underfoot sooner. Give them a topographic map, and they stop tripping in the dark. Hook. If your city posted a low-end weather forecast, would your 3 a.m. change? Even with better sensors and smarter models, one boundary doesn't move: the brain. The map can show when and where the lows rise, and a twin can predict a room's favorite note. But the final amplifier still lives between your ears. That's where the next chapter heads, into the loops that make a faint pattern feel like a threat, and how to loosen their grip. The brain that hears what others don't. Stand in Michael's hallway at 3:05 a.m. The spectrogram shows a thin line in the teens. The accelerometer says the floor is moving a hair. But what decides whether that faint pattern becomes a crisis isn't only out there, it's in the circuitry that assigns meaning to noise. Start with coupling. The auditory system doesn't live alone. It shares a hallway with the limbic system, the network that tags sensations with value: safe, interesting, threatening. When a low, steady pattern lands just above detectability, the ear hands the limbic system a question. If the answer comes back possible threat, the autonomic brakes ease off. Heart rate inches up, pupils open a shade, cortisol drips. That state boosts perception. Sounds feel closer. The same line on a graph now lands with more weight in the body. You feel the hum more because your system is ready for danger. And because you feel it more, the limbic tag hardens. That's the feedback loop. Anxiety amplifies perception. Amplified perception validates anxiety. Predictive coding sits on top of that like a coach. The brain expects patterns and fills gaps. In a quiet room with a known history, the model it runs at bedtime includes, that low thing might return. The brain samples the air and structure with that expectation, priming the filters. A sub-threshold rhythm that would be ignored on a vacation night gets promoted to consciousness at home. The loop tightens because the prediction is kind of right. There is a low rhythm and kind of wrong. Its meaning isn't danger, but the brain cares about speed, not truth. It flags first and asks for evidence later. This is why two people in one room can live different midnights. Denise slides toward watchfulness after the first uneasy breath. Her limbic system learned across dozens of nights that the hum predicts bad sleep. Her partner's brain never built that association. The same physical input hits two very different priors. One system turns the gain up, the other keeps it flat. There are close cousins to this pattern. Tinnitus isn't imagined sound. It's real neural activity in auditory circuits that the brain stops suppressing. Misophonia isn't being dramatic. It's the limbic system assigning a threat label to specific patterns and then reacting fast. PPPD takes a normal background of internal motion cues and refuses to file them under ignore. In all three, the sensation is real, the suffering is real, and the lever that worsens or eases it is the brain's weighting system, its salience map. Michael stumbled into this lesson one night. He woke to the familiar press, sat up, and reached for the phone to hunt the source. Halfway down the hall, he stopped, leaned on the wall, and breathed to a slow count. He pictured the spectrogram instead of the bedroom. He told himself out loud, "This is my house liking a low note. My body is reacting. I can ride it." The pressure didn't vanish. The panic didn't bite. He lay back down, not because the line dropped, but because the label shifted from threat to pattern. There's technique behind that moment. Cognitive behavioral therapy for sound sensitivity doesn't argue you out of sensation. It builds believable thoughts and simple actions you can pair with the cue, then rehearses them when you're calm. The next time the cue shows up, the brain finds a practice path. That alone lowers arousal, and when arousal drops, the auditory-limbic loop loses fuel. Perception softens because anxiety isn't amplifying it. The body can help train the brain too. Vestibular rehab exposes the balance system to control gentle mismatches. Head turns, gaze stabilization, so it stops overreacting to slow sway. In someone like Sam, that raises the threshold at which low-frequency motion feels wrong. Fewer wrong flags means fewer limbic alerts. Fewer alerts mean less gain on the auditory channel when the building breathes. Expectation is sticky, so you have to reshape it with repetition. Denise built a wind-down ritual that started before the hour her logs dreaded. Dim lights, a hot shower to drop core temperature, brown noise low enough to blur edges without adding its own beat. Then a 2-minute breathing set that she only did in bed. Over weeks, her brain started predicting sleep at that hour with the same confidence it used to predict hum. The two predictions fought each other. The one with the calmer body behind it started to win. There's a simple rule that kept surfacing in their notes. Don't chase. When the line arrives, don't start hunting vents or moving furniture at 3 a.m. That trains the brain that the cue demands action. Sit up, plant your feet, name the pattern, breathe on a count. If you need to move, change rooms once and commit. Every night you complete that script without panic. Your system dials the salience down a notch. Viral-friendly mantra. Map by day, ride by night. None of this denies the external driver. The graphs are still there, the room still rings, the ocean still pushes, the grid still modulates, a fan still breathes, but between the wave and the suffering sits a gate. For the 2%, learning the gate's habits isn't self-help fluff. It's engineering, aimed at the only amplifier you always carry. A life retuned. Denise didn't start with belief. She started with a clock. 3:07 a.m. again. She met Michael and Sam in a kitchen that felt like a lab, and they built a plan that didn't promise silence, just control. Step 1 was the room. They'd already mapped hotspots. Denise marked the floor with painter's tape where her chest eased, then turned the bed so her head lived there. She capped the flue with a dense, gasketed plug and sealed the leaky return with proper mastic. Under the legs, she slid elastomer pads that made the frame heavy to push. That night, the line on Sam's spectrogram still rose around 17 hertz, but her diary said 1 wake-up, not 3. She circled it in pencil, wary but relieved. Then the body. She met a vestibular therapist who gave her 2 home exercises, gaze stabilization and gentle head turns, that at first made her feel silly, and then, after a week, less twitchy at slow motion. She added magnesium at night with her doctor's blessings, steady meals, earlier evenings, and the breath routine she practiced sitting up in bed. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. At 3:07, instead of walking the house, she sat, planted her feet, counted, and waited 2 minutes before deciding anything. Michael leaned on cognition. He'd been the midnight hunter, phone flashlight in one hand, anger in the other. He wrote a single sentence on an index card and taped it inside the nightstand. "This room likes a low note. My body can ride it." The first nights, it felt corny. By the second week, it felt like a script that caught him before the loop took over. He still woke. He didn't spiral. Sam turned tinkering into restraint. He swapped a flex connector into a humming duct, added damping to a thin plenum, and scheduled his mini-split to hold a steady low speed after midnight instead of cycling. The modulation sidebands in his overnight plots shrank. He stopped chasing the last decibel at 2 a.m. and saved changes for daylight. They built community in the gaps. 3 neighbors who'd never met compared notes on a shared dock. They didn't argue causes. They traded timings and small wins. One discovered the stairwell was calm and slept there on the worst nights without shame. Another convinced the building manager to tighten a rooftop unit after sharing a polite 1-page log. The hum didn't vanish. Their sense of being alone did. By month's end, Denise's diary shifted from dread to pattern. She still saw the 3 o'clock hour sometimes, but she wasn't wide awake for the rest of the night. Her partner stopped whispering, afraid to disturb her, and started sleeping again, too. Mornings weren't triage. They were coffee, then work, then an evening that didn't revolve around bracing for a baseline. There was a moment that sealed it. A storm rolled in, the outdoor pressure map brightened, and the house leaned into its low favorite. Denise woke, felt the press behind her eyes, and reached for the old impulse to fix the room right now. She didn't. She counted breaths, pictured the spectrogram needle, and let the wave pass through her instead of chasing it across the floor. She fell back asleep in minutes. The hum stayed. Its power over her didn't. Life didn't become quiet. It became tunable. The house learned softer notes. The body learned not to turn every note into an alarm. And the nights, once a minefield, became navigable terrain. A small slice of us hears the planet and our machines arguing. And sometimes that argument lands in a bedroom at 3:07 a.m. If you want more true stories where biology collides with physics, subscribe. Watch our companion piece on how buildings accidentally amplify invisible forces and how to see them before they shape your nights. Turn on notifications so the next anomaly hiding in your house doesn't catch you